My mommy has been missing for 3 days. The trembling voice of a 4-year-old girl made the powerful man freeze on the marble steps of the Moretti estate. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying. Her small hand clutched the sleeve of his coat. It was her last remaining hope. Alessandro Moretti lowered himself onto the cold stone. He was not a man who knelt, not for prayer, not for begging, not for anyone. But the small girl standing in front of him was not asking him to kneel. She was asking him to listen. Bare feet touched the cold stone. A cotton nightdress printed with faded yellow flowers was wrinkled. Her hair was tangled at the crown. Her small chin trembled as she tried very hard not to fall apart. "Tell me," he said. His voice came out softer than it had come out in weeks. Lily drew a shaking breath. Words tumbled out between hiccups. Her mother had taken Miss Clara down to the wine cellar 3 evenings ago. They were choosing a bottle of red wine as a surprise for Uncle Murphy. Her mother told her she would be right back. She had promised. She had not come back. Miss Clara had come upstairs alone, smiling in the way grown women smiled at children when they tried to sound calm. Miss Clara had said, "Mommy went to visit Grandma in New Jersey. Something urgent. Something that could not wait." Lily looked directly into Alessandro's eyes. Her small mouth firmed. "She did not kiss me goodbye. Mommy never leaves without kissing me goodbye. Never." 3 nights, Lily told him. She had slipped out of her bed after the house went quiet. 3 nights she had walked barefoot down the west corridor, past sleeping guards who never noticed a child that small. 3 nights she had pressed her ear against the cold steel of the cellar door. Last night she said she had heard something. Not a voice. A dull, patient thumping. Like someone knocking who had been knocking for a very long time. Alessandro felt a cold current move down his spine. He knew Allie Carter. He knew the woman who brought him coffee before every meeting. He knew the woman who never once asked him what happened behind closed doors. He knew the woman who had polished his late mother's portrait every Sunday. That woman would not leave Lily without kissing her goodbye. Not for a sick mother. Not for anything on this earth. He rose to his full height. 2 bodyguards straightened immediately behind him. "Follow me," he said. No questions. Lily's small hand slipped into his. Her fingers curled around his own with a grip stronger than any grown man's. She did not let go. Alessandro moved through the great hall. His bodyguards followed 3 steps behind. He pulled his phone from his coat pocket. His thumb moved once. A message to the deputy housekeeper. "Gather every member of the staff in the main hall now. Nobody leaves." They passed through the west corridor, past the tall oil painting of his father, past the sealed door of the wine kitchen, then down the spiral stairs of dark iron into the basement. The temperature dropped with every step. Lily counted the stairs under her breath. 22. She had counted them before. 3 nights in a row. At the bottom of the stairs, the corridor opened onto the old cellar door. Alessandro stopped so suddenly that the guard nearly walked into his back. A lock. A new lock, bright, brass, machined, utterly out of place on a door whose original iron latch was still bolted at the top. He had walked past this door 1,000 times. He had never seen this lock before he flew to Sicily. Footsteps sounded above them on the spiral stairs. A voice followed. Warm. Familiar. Wrong. "Murphy, are you home already? What are you doing down here? Julian Vance descended the last curve of the stairwell, his expression arranged into an easy brotherly concern. 42 years old, the man who had pulled Alessandro out of a burning car. The man Alessandro had introduced to 5 different bosses as his brother. Alessandro did not turn around. He raised one finger and pointed at the lock. Who put this here? Julian came down the last 3 steps in an unhurried rhythm. Oh, that. Clara had it installed last week. She said the reserve vintages down here were worth more than most of the cars in the drive. It seemed reasonable. I approved it. Lily tugged at Alessandro's sleeve. Her whisper was so quiet only he could hear it. Mommy is in there, I heard her. Julian turned toward the child with a soft, coaxing smile. He lowered himself to one knee. Sweetheart, your mother went to visit your grandmother. You do not want to bother Uncle Murphy after such a long trip, do you? Alessandro did not look at Julian. He looked at the lock. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. Something in Julian's voice had been too smooth, too fast. A man who had truly only approved a lock as a favor would have paused. Julian had done none of those things. He had reached for the correction before the accusation had even formed. The instinct that had kept Alessandro alive through 17 years raised the hair on his neck. He did not say a single word to Julian. He turned to his 2 bodyguards instead. Break it now. Julian stepped forward. Is this necessary, Murphy? It is only a cellar door. Break it. The metal cutter shrieked in the narrow basement. A high, wounded sound. Julian took one silent step back into the shadow of the stairwell. His eyes moved through something no adult in the room saw. Only Lily saw it. 30 seconds. The metal cutter bit into the brass. 40 seconds. The lock gave with a metallic scream. The steel door rocked inward on its hinges. Alessandro pushed Lily gently back behind him. He stepped inside first. The smell hit him before his eyes adjusted. Damp stone, the deep, sweet decay of oak barrels, and beneath both, the unmistakable smell of a human body that had gone 3 days without water. A single bulb overhead flickered against the low ceiling. Allie Carter lay slumped against the far wine rack. Her wrists were bound with rough hemp rope, dark with dried blood. Her lips were split down the center, cracked white. Her hair was matted flat against her temple with dried sweat. The small silver pendant her mother had given her still rested against her collarbone. Beside her on the flagstone floor was a small puddle of water, a rusted trickle from an old, cold storage tap. That trickle was the only reason she was still alive. Alessandro crossed the cellar in 4 long strides and dropped to his knees. He had not knelt beside anyone since the night his wife died. Allie, it is me. I am home. Her eyes opened slowly. They were red-rimmed and unfocused. She looked at him. Then her gaze slid past his shoulder. She saw Lily standing in the doorway, with both hands pressed to her mouth. Her whole body drew a single, sharp breath. The first word she spoke was not for herself. Lily, are you all right, baby? Lily broke. She flew across the cellar and threw herself against her mother's chest. Allie could not lift her arms. She could only press her cheek against the top of her daughter's head. Alessandro's hands went to the rope. The knots were tight. He drew the small blade from his inner pocket and cut them one by one. The bruises beneath the coils were deep purple. She had fought this rope for 3 days. He shrugged off his coat and settled it around her shoulders. At the top of the spiral stairs, Julian's voice arrived, pitched at the perfect note of horrified disbelief. My God, what is this? Allie, how did you get down here? Who did this to you? Alessandro did not answer. He did not look up. He slid one arm beneath Allie's shoulders and the other beneath her knees. He lifted her off the cellar floor. She weighed almost nothing. 3 days without food had made sure of that. Lily walked beside her, her small hand pressed against her mother's ankle. Alessandro carried Allie up the spiral stairs, one careful step at a time. When he stepped into the great hall, the entire household staff was assembled. 42 people stood in 3 uneven rows beneath the crystal chandelier. When they saw the woman in his arms, the room went utterly still. At that exact moment, the tall doors of the main staircase opened. Clara Sterling descended the marble steps in a pale silk robe. She had made it 3 steps down before she saw what her fiancé was carrying. Every drop of color drained from her face. Murphy, what is this, Allie? Why is she? Alessandro did not look at her. He crossed the hall to the long velvet couch and lowered Allie onto it. He arranged his coat around her shoulders. Only then did Alessandro turn. He did not raise his voice. The calm in his voice was the most dangerous calm he owned. Clara, you told this house that Allie had gone to New Jersey to visit her mother. Is that correct? I thought she had. She has been locked in the wine cellar for 3 days, behind a lock installed last week. Explain that to me. The hall went silent, in a way marble rooms rarely go. Clara's hand rose to her throat. Her fingers were trembling. I did not install any lock. I never asked for a lock I do not know anything about. Julian stepped smoothly into the space beside her. His voice slid into the room like oil. Murphy, please. There is clearly a misunderstanding here. Let me handle this. Tonight I will find out exactly what happened. Alessandro looked at Julian for 1 long second. 2 seconds. Then he nodded once. Very well, you handle it. Tonight, I want everything on my desk by morning. Julian inclined his head with the practiced grace of a loyal lieutenant. He gestured to 3 bodyguards and moved off toward the west wing. He did not look back. At 4:00 a.m., a soft knock came at the study door. Alessandro was reviewing the lawyer's report from the desk. He said, "Enter." Julian stepped in. He carried a leather folder and a small canvas evidence pouch. His face was arranged into something that looked convincingly like heartbreak. "Murphy," Julian said, lowering his voice. "I did not want to believe it, but the evidence is too clear." He laid the folder on the dark wood desk. He opened it item by item. The first item was a printed still from the surveillance archive. Timestamped 4:00 p.m., 3 days earlier. Clara stood at the entrance of the cellar corridor. One hand rested on Allie's shoulder, guiding her toward the spiral stairs. Directly after that frame, Julian said quietly, "The entire cellar camera system went dark for 47 minutes. When it came back on, only Clara walked back up. No other person entered the corridor during that window." The second item was small and cold in the palm. A brass key. Still bright. The twin of the lock that had been cut open that morning. Julian set it on the desk beside a photograph of Clara's dressing table drawer. The key nested beneath a lacquered jewelry box. The third item was a phone log. Julian slid it forward. 7 calls from her personal line to a prepaid number. Unregistered. No owner on record. All placed after midnight during the 3 days Allie was missing. The number went inactive an hour before Alessandro landed from Sicily. The fourth item was the heaviest. Julian set it down last, as though even naming it cost him pain. Photographs of the contents of Clara's private safe, spread open under a sharp reading lamp. A folded defense schematic of the Moretti estate. Every camera marked, every guard post marked, every access point marked in a precise hand. Alessandro's 6-month movement calendar complete with the confidential Sicily meeting. And a single index card in pencil, written in a neat feminine hand, listing 8 digits. The combination to Alessandro's personal safe correct to the last digit. Murphy, Julian said, his voice dropping to a whisper. This is not a jealous woman locking a housekeeper in a cellar. This is a plant. She's a Bellini asset. Alessandro sat very still in his leather chair. He looked down at the desk, then out through the tall window at the first gray suggestion of dawn. Touching the cold garden wall, 10 months moved through him, in a slow, silent parade. Clara weeping softly the first time he told her about his mother. Clara kneeling in the family chapel at Christmas, lighting a candle for a woman she had never met. Clara pressing her forehead to his on the balcony the night he told her about his late wife. Her tears warm against his skin, all of it real. Or so he had thought. And her motive for locking Allie? Alessandro asked. Julian did not miss a beat. His answer came smooth, ready, unhesitating. Allie is the person in this house you trust most. She notices what others do not. If she had walked into the wrong room at the wrong moment while Clara was moving the schematic out, the entire operation would have collapsed. Locking her away kept the Bellini side of the plan quiet until the extraction was complete. Allie was never the target. She was the obstacle. The answer fit. It fit too well. Alessandro nodded slowly. He did not know that the man laying out this evidence had also built each piece of it, one careful detail at a time. Just before dawn, 2 bodyguards escorted Clara into the city. Alessandro had refused to allow her time to dress. She entered still wearing the pale silk robe from hours before. Her feet in soft slippers, her hair uncombed, her face bare and swollen from a night of weeping, into a pillow no one had come to comfort. She stopped just inside the door and looked at him. For one long moment, neither of them spoke. He sat behind the desk. The folder Julian had left lay open before him. What do you have to say, Clara? I did not do any of these things. I swear to God. The spare key to the cellar door was found in your drawer, Alessandro said. Explain. I do not know how it got there. I never asked for it. I never touched it. Someone must have placed it. The defense schematic of this house was in your safe. The combination to my personal safe written in your own hand. Explain. Her face went the color of old paper. Her lips parted, closed, parted again. The safe I changed the combination last week. Julian suggested it. He said with the wedding approaching, there would be strangers in and out of the estate. He said I should refresh my security. I wrote the new number in the small journal on my dressing table so I would not forget it. Who enters your room? Alessandro asked. Only me. The housekeeper who cleans it, and Julian a few times to go over the seating arrangements for the guests from Sicily. Alessandro looked at her for a long time. He wanted to believe her. Some part of him, some smaller and older part beneath the boss, was begging him to believe her. But she could not answer any single piece of evidence with anything except a shake of her head and a name. No opposing document, no witness, no timeline, only tears. 7 calls from your line to a prepaid number during the 3 days Allie was locked in that cellar, Alessandro said. Explain. He put his elbows on the wood and lowered his face into his hands. For the first time since the night his wife had died, he let his shoulders shake. That night, for the first time in 10 months, Alessandro slept alone. He did not know that the man who had truly betrayed him was sleeping soundly in the study, 1 door down the corridor. The next morning, before the sun had cleared the garden wall, Julian called an emergency council. In the long meeting room on the 2nd floor, Alessandro entered to find 3 senior Moretti elders already seated at the dark oak table. Don Salvatore, gray-bearded and slow-eyed, who had served under Alessandro's father. Don Ricci, a lean man with a lawyer's mouth. Don Bruno, the oldest of the 3, whose hands trembled slightly but whose mind never did. The subject on the table was Clara. Julian stood at the head of the room, tablet in hand, evidence photographs already projected on the wall. He looked as though he had not slept, though Alessandro noted silently that the man's collar was fresh and his shave clean. Elders, Julian said, his voice carrying the smooth weight of professional urgency. This is no longer a personal matter. This is a security breach. Clara has passed the defense schematic of this estate to the Bellini family. Every camera, every guard post, every access route. If we hesitate, they attack. Perhaps tonight, perhaps in an hour. We need a public execution. Immediately, it deters Bellini. It steadies our own ranks. Any delay weakens us further. Don Salvatore nodded slowly, one thick hand smoothing his beard. Julian is right. We cannot keep an informant sleeping under this roof. A gangrenous limb is cut without ceremony. Don Ricci steepled his fingers. And yet, she's the fiancée of the head of this family. If we execute her without process, the 5 Sicilian houses will read it as panic, as a man who cannot manage his own household. That perception may cost us more than the schematic. Precisely why it must be public, Julian said without missing a beat. Let the Sicilian houses see that Murphy is strong enough to punish even the woman he loves for the sake of the family. It becomes proof of discipline, not proof of chaos. Alessandro said nothing. He watched Julian's face. He watched the small muscle at the corner of Julian's jaw. That muscle had never twitched in 17 years of shared rooms and shared silences. And now it twitched twice while Julian spoke the word public. He watched the way Julian's fingers tapped once against the edge of the tablet, then stilled by force of will. And he listened to something under the words, a fine, thin current he had heard once before, in the voice of a Neapolitan lieutenant who had turned out to be selling their ship-in schedules 3 months before Alessandro's father caught him. A true consigliere would have counseled patience, would have asked for a second sweep of the safe, would have suggested holding Clara until every phone call was traced back to its origin, every timestamp verified twice, would have wanted certainty above speed. Julian wanted speed above everything. I need time, Alessandro said. His voice was even. I will investigate personally. 1 week. Julian's brow drew together. It happened too fast, before he could stop it, before he could arrange his face. Then the smile arrived a half-second later. Warm, brotherly, resigned. Murphy. Every day we wait is a day Bellini has room to move. But if you want a week, I respect that. Of course I do. Don Bruno lifted a shaking hand. 1 week, no more, and no visitors to her room without the presence of 2 elders. The meeting broke apart. Chairs slid back. The elders left first, then the aides. Julian lingered a moment at the doorway, glanced once at Alessandro, and left without another word. Alessandro walked back alone to his study. He did not sit at the desk. He crossed to the tall window that overlooked the south garden, and stood with one hand pressed flat against the cold glass. 3 months ago, in that garden, beneath the oldest olive tree on the property, he had lowered herself onto one knee and asked Clara Sterling to be his wife. She had wept. He had wept. Julian had been standing on the terrace, watching, and had raised a glass of champagne when they walked back to the house. 3 questions began to sound inside Alessandro's head, one after the other, like a slow bell. Why does Julian want her dead so fast? Why did every piece of evidence surface in a single night? Who introduced Clara Sterling to me 10 months ago? Alessandro could not yet give a name to the suspicion moving through him. But the instinct of the man who ran an empire on knives had begun quietly to wake up. That same afternoon, Alessandro had Allie carried to the small cottage at the far end of the walled garden, the one she had lived in for 3 years with Lily. He believed she would sleep more easily in her own bed, beneath her own quiet ceiling, than in the guest suite of the main house. A nurse was posted at the door around the clock. A cook was instructed to send warm broth every 4 hours, whether Allie asked for it or not. She spent the first day sitting up against 3 pillows, spooning thin rice porridge past her cracked lips, while Lily lay curled against her uninjured side. Alessandro visited twice. He did not stay long either time. He asked how she felt. He looked at the bruises on her wrists, wrapped now in soft white gauze. He touched Lily's hair once with the flat of his palm and left without speaking of Clara or Julian or anything that happened above the cottage roof. Clara stood alone in the West Wing room. The heavy oak door was locked from the outside. There was no key in the lock. There was no handle on the inner side that could turn without a master code. She walked to the window. The glass was thick. Reinforced steel mesh ran through the frame. She could see the south garden down below, the exact spot where 3 months ago a man had knelt on one knee under the olive tree. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass. Her breath left a small gray circle. She did not cry anymore. The crying had stopped hours ago when the guards took her. Her throat was raw. Her chest felt hollowed out as if a large hand had reached inside her ribs and pulled the warmth away. "Murphy," she whispered to the glass. The name tasted like ash. She remembered every second of the night before. The way Julian had stepped into the study with that leather folder. The way Alessandro's eyes had changed. Not angry. Cold. The coldness of a man who looked at an enemy across a card table and calculated the cost of a bullet. She walked to the small dresser. The tray of food a guard had slid through the slot hours earlier sat untouched. A bowl of cold broth. A slice of dry bread. A small cup of water. She had not touched any of it. She had no hunger left. Only a dull, persistent disbelief. How did the key get into her drawer? She had never touched that key. She had never even known there was a spare key to the wine cellar and the safe combination. She touched her own nose, where the skin was still red from where the guard's fingers had gripped her. Julian had told her to change the combination last week. Julian. The word formed in her mind like a sharp stone. She sat down on the edge of the wide bed. Her fingers traced the edge of the silk coverlet. Julian had been the one who suggested it. Julian had been the one who walked into her dressing room 3 times in 10 days to check the guest seating arrangements. Julian had been the one standing beside Alessandra when they first met at the charity gala 10 months ago. She stopped. A memory flickered in the dark of her mind. The night of the gala, the champagne fountain, the music echoing off the high marble ceiling. Julian had leaned close to her ear before she had even met Alessandro. He had whispered something. "You look like my mother when she was young. We may even be distant cousins. Small world." She had laughed back then. It had sounded like a harmless joke. A piece of light conversation from a man who wanted to be charming. Now sitting in the locked room with the gray dawn filtering through the steel mesh, the sentence did not sound charming at all. It sounded like a setup written months in advance. She stood up so quickly the blanket slid to the floor. She paced the room. 6 steps to the window. 6 steps to the door. She had to tell Alessandro. She had to make him listen. She walked to the heavy oak door and struck it once with the flat of her palm. "Let me out!" No sound came back. Only the heavy, indifferent silence of the West Wing. Down the corridor, in the private study, Julian Vance sat in the leather chair. He wore a dark suit. His cuffs were immaculate. He held a silver fountain pen between his fingers, turning it over and over. The door to his study was closed. The latch was thrown. On the desk lay a small notebook filled with names. Names of the senior Moretti captains. Names of the guards stationed at the eastern gate. Names of the men who still answered directly to Don Salvatore. Julian did not look at the notebook. He looked at the wall opposite his desk, where a dark oil painting of Alessandro's father hung in a heavy gilt frame. 7 days, Julian murmured to himself. Don Bruno gave him 7 days. 7 days is more than enough time to finish a house that is already cracking. He picked up a secure burner phone from the corner of the blotter. His thumb pressed 3 digits. A dry, flat voice answered on the second ring from somewhere in the city. "Status. The girl is locked in the West Wing," Julian said. "The boss is isolated. The elders are divided between the execution and the process. The wedge is in." "And the housekeeper?" "She is in the cottage by the garden," Julian said, recovering from 3 days in the dark. "She saw nothing. She knows nothing. Keep it that way until the 3rd day," the voice on the other end replied. "Then we move the 2nd phase." The line went dead with a soft click. Julian set the burner phone down beside the leather folder. He smiled. It was not a large smile, only a slight upward curve of the lips. The kind of smile a man wears when he has watched a building burn for 20 years and finally sees the roof beams snap. Down in the main house, Alessandro sat at his desk. The room smelled of old paper and cold coffee. He had not slept. His eyes were bloodshot. Every time he closed them, he saw Clara's face as the guards lifted her from the floor. The way her fingers had reached for his shoes. The way she had screamed his name. "I did not do this." The sentence echoed in the quiet room. He opened the center drawer of the desk. Inside lay the small silver engagement ring he had slipped off her finger. The metal was cold. He picked it up. He turned it over in his palm. 10 months of his life sat in that small circle of platinum and diamond. 10 months of quiet dinners, of late-night talks in the library, of her hand resting on his arm when the Sicilian bosses raised their voices too high at the long table. A woman who wept for a mother she had never met. A woman who stood beside him when his enemies tried to break the gates. Could a woman like that sit in a room for 3 days while an innocent mother starved in a cellar, and then lie without a single tremor in her voice? His father had taught him a rule when he was 12 years old. Never trust a tear until you know what caused it. He closed his hand around the ring. The sharp edge of the diamond bit into his palm. He did not feel the pain. He felt only the cold, steady pressure of a man walking across a frozen lake, where every step might be the one that breaks the ice. Down in the walled garden, the small cottage was quiet. Allie Carter sat in the upholstered chair by the window. A gray wool blanket was pulled over her knees. Her left wrist was wrapped in white gauze. The bruising beneath the bandage was turning from deep purple to a sickly yellow. On the small cot in the next room, Lily was sleeping. Her breathing was light and even. Every few minutes, the child's small hand would twitch, as if she were still reaching for something in the dark. Allie looked down at her own hands. The skin was still dry. The nails were trimmed short. She remembered the sound of the metal cuttle shrieking against the new brass lock. She remembered the light hitting Alessandro's face as he dropped to his knees. And she remembered something else. The way Julian had walked down the spineless stairs. Too slow. Too calm. A man who had just discovered a horrific crime in his best friend's house does not descend stairs like a guest arriving for dinner. He arrives with a script already written in his head. Allie turned her head toward the window. The hedgerows were dark against the fading afternoon light. She did not know what Clara had done or had not done. She knew only one thing with the absolute certainty of a person who has spent 3 days staring at a single patch of damp stone. The lock on that cellar door had not been installed by a woman who cried when a stray cat died in the drive. It had been installed by someone who knew every blind spot in the estate's security grid. Someone who had access to the master key ring in the pantry. Someone who could walk through the west corridor at 4 in the afternoon without a single guard asking questions. She reached out with her right hand and touched the window glass. Her reflection stared back at her from the dark, pale, thin. A woman who cleaned floors in a house where men decided who lived and who died. "They think I am just a housekeeper," she whispered to the glass. "They think I stayed in the dark because I was weak." She pulled her hand back. Her fingers curled into a tight fist against the blanket. In the West Wing, Clara heard footsteps in the corridor outside her door. Heavy footsteps. Not the light, hurried steps of a maid bringing a tray. The steady, deliberate tread of a guard changing shifts. She stood up from the bed. She walked to the door and pressed her ear against the wood. A low murmur of voices. "The dawn wants no visitors," Weingard said. "Not even the elders?" "Especially not the elders." He gave her 7 days. 7 days is a long time in this house. The footsteps moved away. fading down the hall until there was nothing left except the hum of the old radiator beneath the window. Clara stepped back from the door. She looked at her own hands in the dim light. She was not going to wait 7 days for a council of men to decide whether she died in the courtyard or vanished into a carriage in the middle of the night. If Alessandro Moretti would not listen to her tears, she would find another way to make him see. And down in the garden cottage, Allie turned off the small bedside lamp. The room went dark. Outside, the wind began to move through the olive branches. 2 women, separated by 100 yards of stone and iron, looked out into the same night. Both of them started the week believing they were safe behind the high walls of the Moretti estate. Both of them now knew that the wall was not keeping the enemy out. It was keeping them in. Allie sat by the small window in the garden cottage. The gray wool blanket was pulled over her knees. Her left wrist still throbbed beneath the white gauze. The bruising had faded to a pale yellow around the edges. She looked out at the hedgerows. Her mind moved back to the afternoon in the wine cellar. Victoria had come down the kitchen steps, smiling in that faintly stiff way she always smiled, asking for a bottle of red wine as a surprise. Allie had followed her without a single trace of suspicion. But sitting by the window now, she turned the memory over like a cold stone. Victoria had not worn gloves. Victoria had not glanced once at the corridor cameras. Victoria had not paused to check the timing. She had walked straight down the corridor with the loose, distracted energy of a woman genuinely doing what she said she was doing. Allie had watched enough men in this house move like professionals. She knew what a professional looked like. Victoria did not move like one. A second detail surfaced. Allie held very still in her chair as it became clear. Victoria had opened the steel cellar door with an ornate old key. The original key. The one that hung on the housekeeping ring in the pantry. And had hung there since Alessandro's father was alive. She had not used the newer, duplicate key, the bright brass one Julian Vance had produced from the dressing table drawer at 4 a.m. Then how had that duplicate come to be in the drawer at all? Allie had cleaned Victoria's rooms for 10 months. She knew who moved through those rooms. The quiet young maid Julian had recommended and personally hired 8 months ago. A young woman named Rosa, who spoke very little English and always arrived at odd hours. And Julian himself, who had lately been dropping by the West Suite 2 or 3 times a week, always to go over the wedding seating chart with Victoria, always without Alessandro present. The more she turned the pieces, the more the whole shape leaned slightly to one side. But she had no proof. She had only a feeling. She was a housekeeper. She could not walk up the marble stairs and stand in Alessandro's study and say the name, Julian Vance, to the face of the man who had raised him. She needed something specific, something a Mafia boss would accept from the mouth of a woman who cleaned his floors. By nightfall, sitting in the darkening cottage with Lily's soft breathing in the next room, Allie made her decision. She would open her eyes. She would open her ears. She would watch Julian. 3 years inside the Moretti estate had taught Allie one lesson above every other. In a house full of wronged men, the woman who stayed silent was the woman who heard the most. In the locked room in the West Wing, the tray of food sat untouched on the dresser. Victoria had not eaten. She had not slept. She sat on the wide window seat with her knees drawn up beneath the silk robe. She looked out at the garden, where 3 months earlier, a man had knelt for her under an olive tree. She began, slowly and deliberately, to take her memory apart. the way a woman takes apart a broken necklace to find the missing bead. Who had actually stepped inside these rooms over the past 10 months? Who had come near the small safe behind the mirror? Who had suggested things? Small and reasonable things that, when laid out in a straight line, no longer looked reasonable at all. She began to see Julian who had introduced her to Alessandro at the charity gala 10 months ago, guiding her elbow across the ballroom with the easy confidence of an older brother making a match. Julian, who last week had leaned against her doorway with a warm smile, saying the wedding would bring strangers through the house, saying she really should refresh the combination on her personal safe. Julian, who had come by 3 times in the last 10 days to look over the seating arrangement, always without Alessandro, always alone, always lingering a little longer than the seating arrangement required. Julian, who 8 days ago had lowered his voice at the top of the west staircase, murmuring almost fondly, "Be careful with Allie. The boss trusts her further than a housekeeper deserves. That kind of trust is dangerous for a wife." Victoria stopped. She reached for a memory she had never bothered to hold carefully before. Her grandmother, gone now 9 years, sitting in the sunroom of the little house in Rhode Island, the framed sepia photograph on the mantle of an older brother who had immigrated to America alone when he was 17, boarded a ship in Naples, sent 1 letter from New York, and then vanished into the country as completely as a stone dropped into deep water. That photograph, the line of his jaw, the set of his brow. Victoria pressed both palms against her mouth. Julian Vance had those same features. She'd seen them at the gala, and thought only that he was handsome in a familiar way. If Julian was her distant cousin, if he had known that from the first night, if he had known it and she had not. She stood up so quickly the blanket slid to the floor. She began to pace the small room from the window to the locked door and back. 6 steps each way. She had to tell Alessandra. But she was sealed inside these 4 walls. The guard outside her door had been personally selected by Julian. Every meal came through Julian's Chave command. Every message she might try to write would pass through hands loyal to Julian before it reached Alessandro. She needed someone else. Someone Julian would not think to watch. Someone who lived inside this estate, but did not answer to the West Wing command that Julian ran. Only one name came to her: Allie. 2 women who had stood at opposite ends of the same house were now assembling the same picture. And neither of them yet knew the other was assembling it too. Down in the garden cottage, Allie rose from her chair. The room was silent. The nurse had gone to the main kitchen for fresh water. Allie walked softly to the doorway of the bedroom. Lily was sleeping on her side, one small hand tucked under her cheek. The silver swallow pendant caught a faint beam of light from the hallway. Allie touched the metal. Her fingers were steady now. The fear that had choked her in the cellar was gone, replaced by something colder and sharper. A house of wolves cannot be saved by closing the door. It must be cleaned from the inside out. In the main house, Julian sat at his desk. He looked at his watch. It was past midnight. The estate was wrapped in a deep, heavy silence. He pulled a small leather ledger from the bottom drawer. He opened it to a page filled with numbers and names. His thumb traced a single line of ink. Everything was in place. The elders were waiting for the 7 days to expire. Alessandro was isolated by his own rigid code of evidence. The trap was fully closed. He closed the ledger with a soft snap that echoed in the empty study. He stood up, walked to the window, and looked out across the dark lawn toward the garden cottage. A single yellow light burned behind the cottage window. Julian's eyes narrowed. "Still awake, little housekeeper," he murmured to the glass. "Enjoy it. You only have a few days left to look at the garden." He turned away from the glass. He sat back down at his desk and pulled out a clean sheet of paper. He began to draft the final notification to Don Bellini. Phase 2 was ready to launch, and neither Allie nor Victoria knew that the final countdown had already begun. The third night after the rescue, Allie could not sleep. The cottage was silent. Lily had asked for water at 2:30 and drained the small glass on the nightstand. Allie rose barefoot. She wrapped an old cardigan around her shoulders and slipped out of the cottage into the covered walkway. The walkway connected the small house to the main estate kitchen. She meant only to refill the glass. On her way back through the west corridor, she noticed it. A thin strip of yellow light spilling from beneath the door of Julian Vance's private study. The door was not quite closed. It sat open by the width of a finger. She should have kept walking. She began to keep walking. Then she heard his voice. It was not the voice she had heard for 3 years. Not the warm, Underwood voice of the loyal Lord who called Alessandro brother at favorite dinners, and laughed at the cook's jokes, and always thanked the man's my name. This voice was different. It was low. It was cold. It was calm in the way a blade is calm. Allie stopped in the shadow of the doorway. She held the glass of water very still and edges, so that it would not drip into the blend of her cardigan. She barely breathed. Julian was speaking into a burner phone. Don Bellini. Phase 1 is finished. Murder with engagement and safe. The Moretti house is already split. The end is divided clearly. All sovereignty once are executed. Taylor Julian's process. The crack is open. A pause. The thickness of the voice of the other end. The Sicilian bosses are asking each other whether Murphy can still control his own household. That question, once asked, does not close. This is the moment. Another pause. "I need 3 more days to arrange the execution. After that, you can launch." He will be gutted. He will be alone. He will have lost the woman he loves by his own hand, and the elders will be too fractured to hold the line. "The Moretti Empire falls to you." The voice on the other end said something short. Julian's answer came without hesitation. "And I take the right-hand seat in the new house." As agreed. Allie's hand rose to her mouth. The glass shook in her other hand. She stepped backward once. Twice. The soft cotton of her socks silent on the marble. She did not turn her back on the door until she had reached the corner. And then she moved as quickly as her weakened legs would carry her. Past the sleeping wing, across the servants' corridor, out into the covered walkway, and back into the cottage. She closed her own door behind her, leaned against it, and slid slowly down until she was sitting on the floor. Lily was still asleep in the bedroom, small and warm and breathing. Allie looked at her small silhouette in the doorway and understood with a clarity that emptied her lungs. If Julian discovered what she had just heard, her daughter would lose her mother in a way that no basement would ever match. She sat on the floor of the cottage for hours and thought. She could not tell any of the household staff. Julian was the right hand. His fingerprints lay on every roster, every schedule, every payroll. The guards outside Alessandro's suite rotated on a schedule Julian had personally approved. The guards outside her own cottage rotated on that same schedule. Any message she wrote would pass through eyes that answered to Julian before it reached the man she needed to reach. She could trust exactly one person in this estate, Alessandro. But she could not get to him, not without being seen. She looked again at the small figure asleep in the next room. Lily walked through the halls of this house without being questioned by anyone. Lily was allowed into Uncle Murphy's study at any hour of the day or night. Lily was the only person in this estate that Julian's system did not watch. The next morning, a 4-year-old child would carry a folded piece of paper hidden inside the seam of a cloth doll, and she would not know that she was carrying the key that would save an entire empire. Just after 7 in the morning, Lily walked barefoot across the marble floor of the great hall, with a soft cloth doll clutched under one arm. The 2 guards at the base of the main staircase glanced down at her, smiled the way grown men smile at small children in the morning, and let her pass without a word. She climbed the stairs one at a time, humming quietly to herself. The doll's small dress had been unstitched and stitched again along one seam, faster and less neatly than usual. But no adult in the estate would have noticed the difference. She pushed open the study door with both hands. Alessandro looked up from his desk. There were dark half-circles beneath his eyes from a second sleepless night, but he smiled the moment he saw her. "Uncle Murphy," she said, and held out the doll. "Mommy fixed her she wanted you to see." He took the doll gently. He turned it over on his hands with the seriousness of a man being handed a diplomatic document. His thumb ran along the small ridge of new stitching and found what was beneath it. He did not change his face. He smoothed Lily's hair with the flat of his palm. "Thank you, sweetheart. She is a beautiful doll. Tell your mother I said so." Lily nodded solemnly and padded back out of the study. Alessandro closed the door behind her and locked it. He crossed to the desk and worked the folded slip of paper free of the seam with the tip of a letter opener. The handwriting was Allie's. He had seen her handwriting 100 times on the household ledgers. Need to speak alone, not in the study, no one else. Olive Grove. He held the paper for a long moment, and then burned it in the ashtray. At 6 the next morning, the sky above the estate wall was still the color of wet slate. Alessandro was already standing beneath the oldest olive tree when Allie came through the low garden gate, a shawl drawn around her shoulders. She did not sit. She did not waste words. She told him everything she had heard, word for word, in the order the words had come. "Don't Bellini. Phase 1 is finished. 3 more days. The right-hand seat in the new house." Alessandro said nothing for a long time. He looked past her shoulder at the pale line of the horizon and let the last piece slide into place. The man who had introduced Victoria to him. The man who had produced every scrap of evidence in a single night. The man who had pushed for a public execution before the elders could catch their breath. Every question that had been ringing inside him for 2 days now had one answer. And the answer had a face he knew as well as his own. He did not react. He did not curse. He did not touch the pistol beneath his coat. He thanked her. He told her to say nothing to anyone, not even to Lily. He told her to continue exactly as she had been. a housekeeper recovering from an ordeal. Quiet, careful, tired. He told her that if Julian sensed even one changed pattern in her behavior, they were both dead. The rest of that day, Alessandro moved through the estate with the surface of a man distracted by grief. Underneath, he worked. Victoria was still worth something to Alessandro as leverage, worth something to Don Bellini as a trophy, worth something to Julian himself as a shield. He would take her with him. At 2 a.m, he moved. He crossed the darkened East Wing corridor with the master ring of keys that only the second-in-command was permitted to carry. Outside the secured suite where Victoria had been transferred, one of the 2 guards Alessandro had placed to watch him was standing his shift. Julian greeted him by name in a low, friendly tone, stepped in close, and put him on the marble floor in a single, practiced movement. The man did not have time to reach his radio. But there was a second man. The second man was posted 3 corridors away with a monitor. He saw everything on the live feed. He picked up his phone. Julian entered the suite. Victoria was asleep, drugged lightly by the sedative the family physician had left to help her sleep through the guard shift changes. He wrapped her in her own robe, lifted her over one shoulder as gently as he could, and stepped back into the corridor. He did not go straight to the western exit. He turned toward the cottage first. He wanted to be sure about Allie. He was not certain Allie had heard him, but she had been in the west corridor 2 nights before, and Julian did not leave loose threads. He crossed the covered walkway, reached the cottage door, and paused with his hand on the knob. Then he heard from inside the small, unmistakable sound of a child murmuring in her sleep. Lily. If he opened the door and Lily woke, the child would scream. And a screaming child at 2 a.m. would empty every guard barracks on the property in 90 seconds. Julian pulled his hand back. He turned. He walked away. He reached the western service gate 7 minutes later, with Victoria still limp over his shoulder. A dark, unmarked sedan was waiting on the shoulder of the road 2 miles from the estate wall. The car did not carry Bellini plates. Nothing about it could be traced. Inside Alessandro's study, the phone had already rung. Alessandro listened to 8 words and hung up. He called Allie on the internal line. When she picked up, sleep thick. He did not waste breath. Take Lily. Go down to the cellar now. Lock the door from the inside. Do not come out until you hear me call your name. Allie did not ask a single question. She lifted Lily from the small bed, wrapped her in a blanket, and carried her at a run through the covered walkway, down the spiral iron stairs, and into the very cellar where she had spent 3 nights bowed and starving. This time, she pulled the steel door shut behind her from the inside. This time, the room that had almost killed her became the safest room in the house. At 2 a.m, the estate alarm began to scream. 30 Bellini gunmen came over the western wall in 3 coordinated waves. At the exact point where the perimeter cameras had a 2-second sweep gap, Julian had designed that gap himself 3 years earlier, and had renewed the security schematic every quarter since. He had left them a door and drawn them a map, but Alessandro had been waiting. His most experienced men were already in position along the western hedge line, behind the low garden wall, on the balcony of the boathouse. The first Bellini wave crossed the lawn and ran directly into an interlocking crossfire that had been silently rehearsed all afternoon. Muzzle flashes lit the boxwoods. Glass along the west facade burst inward in bright showers. Rounds sparked off the marble balustrade and sang out into the dark garden. Somewhere a fountain shattered and began to hiss. Alessandro commanded from the main floor, moving through the great hall with a pistol in one hand and a radio in the other. 2 attackers made it as far as the east door of the great hall. He put one down at 10 meters and the other at 6, without ever raising his voice. His elite guard held the perimeter wave by wave. Bellini had not sent 30 men to win. Bellini had sent 30 men to be seen losing. The real objective was on the eastern side of the estate. Under cover of the western firefight, 5 gunmen slipped over the low garden wall on the quiet east side, moved through the covered walkway, and descended the spiral iron stairs to the cellar corridor. They knew exactly where to go. They knew the housekeeper had been moved down there. They knew the child was with her. Julian had passed the layout across, before he had lifted Vittoria over his shoulder. 2 Moretti guards were stationed outside the steel cellar door. Both were down within seconds, taken from the darkness of the corridor before either could turn. The steel door came apart under a small, breaching charge. Inside, Allie was already pressed into the far corner with Lily wrapped tight in her arms, her own body angled to shield the child from anything that came through the doorway. She looked directly into the barrel of the lead rifle. She did not close her eyes. The youngest of the 5 gunmen, a boy of maybe 20 with a raw, new scar across his cheek, hesitated. He looked at the child. He lowered the muzzle by 2 inches. The team leader snapped once, low and hard. The woman only, not the child. Move. Allie screamed as 3 hands pulled her upright by the arms. Lily screamed louder, higher, a sound that seemed too large for a 4-year-old's body. One of the men shoved the child gently back down against the stone floor and said, almost kindly, "Sit. Do not run." Then they were gone, and the corridor was gone, and Allie was gone, and the cellar was silent again, except for Lily's crying. 40 minutes later, the last of the Bellini gunmen withdrew from the western grounds. It was not a defeat. It was a withdrawal on schedule. They had done what they had come to do. On the great hall wall, above the shattered mirror, they had left a line of writing in still, wet blood. "We have Victoria now. We have your housekeeper. If you want either woman alive, come alone to the Brooklyn docks before dawn." Alessandro ran through the corridor, took the spiral stairs 3 at a time, and reached the cellar with his shirt torn and his pistol still in his hand. Lily was sitting in the corner where they had left her, arms wrapped tight around the small cloth doll, shaking without sound. On the flagstone beside her small bare foot lay the silver swallow pendant on its broken chain. Alessandro sank to one knee. He picked up the pendant with a hand that no longer felt like his own, and closed his fingers around it until the knuckles went white. Then he set the pistol on the floor, gathered Lily against his chest, and lifted her up. There are moments in a man's life when he knows without a single word passing through him exactly what he is willing to give up everything to keep. Alessandro carried Lily up the spiral stairs with her small body pressed to his chest, and did not put her down until he had crossed the great hall and reached the deputy housekeeper, a broad, calm woman named Rosanna, who had served the Moretti household for 30 years. She was one of the 2 people in the estate whose loyalty he trusted without qualification. He set Lily gently into her arms. "Watch her. I will bring her mother back. I promise. He bent and kissed the child on the forehead. She had stopped crying. Her small face was still wet, but her eyes were clear when she looked up at him. Uncle Murphy, she said, bring Mommy home and Auntie Vic too. Alessandro paused for one full second. A 4-year-old on the most terrifying night of her young life had thought to name a woman she had barely known. A woman who had lived in a different wing of the house and rarely spoken to her. A woman she had every reason to forget in this moment. She had not forgotten her. That said something to Alessandro about the child. It said something to him about the mother who had raised the child. It said something to him about the kind of house he'd almost let Julian Vance turn into ash. He straightened. He crossed the great hall to the operations room and summoned his 12 most elite guards. The men who had trained under his father's captain and had bled for the Moretti name more times than could be counted. Bellini had said, "Come alone." Alessandro had never, in 17 years, believed a single word an enemy said. He would go with 3 teams, 3 points of approach. He knew the Brooklyn docks. He knew the specific warehouse. It had been a Bellini weapons depot during the last years of Prohibition. A squat concrete shell along the East River. 3 doors on the landward side. And 1 submerged access from the water. His father had drawn the layout for him on a napkin 25 years ago, and told him one day he might need to know. The 3 armored SUVs pulled out of the estate gate at 4:30 in the morning. Headlights doused, running dark through the empty avenues. Alessandro sat in the front vehicle beside the driver and did not speak. He was thinking about his wife. He was thinking about the night 7 years earlier when he had come home late from a meeting. He had insisted on taking himself and had walked into their bedroom and found her already dead on the floor beside their bed. 2 shooters had come and gone. He had arrived 9 minutes too late. 9 minutes. He had lived every day of the last 7 years inside those 9 minutes. He could not live inside them again. Not with Allie. Not with Victoria. In the last 3 days, both of the women his life had circled around had been threatened by the same man. One of them he had loved openly. He had told her so beneath an olive tree with a ring in his hand. The other one, he had never once in 3 years allowed himself to name the feeling for. Not even inside his own head. Because to name it would have been to accept that a man in his position was not permitted such a feeling for the woman who cleaned his floors. He slid one hand into the inner pocket of his coat and closed his fingers around the small silver swallow on its broken chain. He would put it back around her neck himself. He would put it back around her neck himself, even if it cost him his own life to do it. The warehouse rose out of the river mist ahead of them, low and gray against a lightning sky. And inside it, something that no one had foreseen was already waiting. The warehouse rose out of the river mist like a concrete tomb. It was low and gray against a lightning sky. Inside the warehouse, the air tasted of salt and rusted iron. 2 wooden chairs had been dragged into the center of the cracked floor. They were set close together, beneath a single hanging bulb. Allie and Clara were bound to them side by side. 20 Bellini gunmen stood in a loose, violent ring around the chairs. At a card table pushed against the far wall, an old man in a dark overcoat sat perfectly still. One liver-spotted hand rested on the head of a silver walking cane. Don Bellini himself had come out to watch the end of a long game. Julian Vance stepped into the ring of yellow light. He stopped directly in front of Clara. His face, for the first time in 10 months, was not arranged for anyone. "I am sorry, cousin," Julian said softly. "But you were the perfect piece." Clara stared up at him with wide, uncomprehending eyes. You truly loved him, Julian continued, his voice echoing in the vast space. That is why he believed the betrayal. Nothing false ever plays as convincingly as a truth held by the wrong person. She turned her head slowly. She looked at Clara's face in the flickering yellow light. She saw every drop of color drain out of the younger woman's skin in one long wave. She saw a woman understand in a single second that her entire life was a lie. Every kindness she had believed she was accepted with over the last 10 months had been a hand moving her across a chessboard. Every warm smile from Julian had been a calculation. In that profound moment of silence, Allie understood it too. Clara had never been her enemy. Clara had never plotted to lock her in that dark wine cellar. Clara had been another prisoner sitting in another kind of cellar. They had simply not seen each other's chains. Outside, the harsh crack of a high-caliber rifle split the Brooklyn morning. The warehouse doors blew inward on 3 sides simultaneously. Blinding white light from tactical flashlights sliced through the gloom. Murphy's 12 elite operators came through the smoke in a flawless, coordinated arc. Muzzle flashes swept the room in short, controlled bursts. The deafening roar of automatic gunfire swallowed the screams of the dying. The Bellini gunmen dropped in the exact sequence they had been standing, one after another, like dominoes falling along the ring around the chairs. Julian stopped looking at his cousin. He spun toward the widening breach in the far steel door. He raised his pistol toward the man he could already see moving through the dust. Murphy Moretti was a shadow of absolute violence. But behind Julian, at the back of the room, one of the last standing Bellini shooters panicked. He saw the Moretti wave rolling relentlessly across the floor. He made a small, stupid, and desperate calculation. Hostages left alive would testify to the 5 families. He swung his heavy assault rifle directly toward Clara's chest. His finger tightened on the trigger. Allie saw the black barrel move before he even fired. She did not think. She did not calculate the odds or the pain. She rose from the floor with the heavy wooden chair still bound to her back. In a single ragged surge of adrenaline, she found a strength that only a mother possesses. A mother who had crawled through 3 nights of darkness for her child. She twisted her bruised torso across the narrow gap between them. She threw herself completely sideways into the line of the shot. The round entered her left shoulder with a sickening impact. It drove clean through the muscle and bone. Hot blood spat across the cold concrete floor. Clara screamed. She did not scream at the deafening sound of the gunshot. She did not scream at the terrifying sight of the wound. She screamed at something she fundamentally could not understand. Why? Clara sobbed wildly, straining against her ropes. Why did you do that for me? Allie collapsed heavily against the side of Clara's chair. Her lips had gone instantly white. She turned her head slightly, struggling to focus her eyes. Her voice came out in a thin, fragile thread. Because you were a prisoner too, and Lily would not want to see anyone else die. Murphy was already across the room. He did not shoot Julian in the chest. He put 2 precise rounds straight through Julian's knees. One, and then the other. He did it without ever breaking his forward stride. He wanted the traitor alive to feel every ounce of what he had destroyed. Julian collapsed to the floor, shrieking in sudden blinding agony. The last 4 Bellini shooters went down in the next 6 seconds. 2 of the elite Moretti guards reached Don Bellini before the old man could even rise from his folding chair. They took him by both arms without a single word. Murphy dropped to his knees beside Allie. He tore off his suit coat. He pressed the thick wool fabric against the bleeding wound at her shoulder with both hands. He pressed down hard. "You will not die," Murphy commanded, his voice shaking with a terror he had not felt in 7 years. "I absolutely forbid you to die. Do you hear me?" Allie smiled weakly up at him. Her vision was beginning to blur at the edges. Murphy frantically reached into his inner pocket with one blood-slicked hand. He pulled out the silver swallow pendant. He unclasped the broken chain. He fastened it carefully around her neck with trembling fingers. "Lily is waiting for you," he whispered fiercely. "She told me I had to bring Auntie Vic home too. You will not make me break a promise to that little girl." Allie closed her eyes. She did not close them to die. She closed them because she simply had nothing left to give the world. Some wounds bleed out onto the floor. Some wounds only weep in the dark. That cold morning, the Brooklyn dock saw both. The private Moretti clinic smelled of clean linen and antiseptic. Dawn was breaking over the eastern wall. The golden light of the new day touched the high windowsill. Allie woke slowly. Her left shoulder throbbed with a dull, heavy ache. The heavy nerve bundle was still mending under layers of white tape. She turned her head slightly on the pillow. Clara Sterling sat in the plastic chair beside the hospital bed. Her hands were resting quietly on the blanket. Her eyes were red from a night without sleep. Clara looked up and saw Allie's eyes open. She did not look away. "You saved my life," Clara said. Her voice was very quiet. Allie shook her head a fraction of an inch. "You were trapped in the same room." Allie whispered, "Just a different door." Clara reached out. Her fingers touched Allie's uninjured right hand. Neither woman spoke for a long time. In that silence, the last 10 months of suspicion, coldness, and invisible walls simply dissolved. Outside the clinic door, Alessandro Moretti stood in the hallway. He did not go inside. He looked through the small glass panel at the two women sitting together. He understood something he had refused to see for 3 years. A true home is not built by guards at the gate. It is built by the people who choose to stand together when the fire starts. 3 days later, the grand hall of the Moretti estate stood full for the first time. Every senior officer of the family was present. The 3 elders sat at the dark oak table. The delegates of all 5 allied Sicilian houses had flown in overnight. Alessandro stood at the head of the room in a plain dark suit. Victoria stood at his side, still pale, still bandaged at the wrists. She stood straight. Alessandro bowed his head. A Mafia boss almost never bows his head in front of anyone. Every man in the room understood it the moment he did. "I was wrong," Alessandro said. His voice carried across the silent, mumbled room without a tremor. "I doubted the woman I swore before God I would love. I let manufactured evidence and my own fear speak louder than my faith. I came within a single word of executing an innocent person with my own hand, in front of every one of you. I return her honor to Victoria Hale, my future wife, and I ask forgiveness from every man in this room for nearly allowing a traitor to drag the Moretti house into the grave. If not for the courage of one woman who carries no Moretti name, and one 4-year-old child, none of us would still be standing under this roof." Victoria broke, her left arm still cradled, her eyes calm and clear. The lanterns caught the small silver swallow at her collarbone and held it glowing. The story had begun with a man stepping down from a black car onto a marble step, a small 4-year-old girl running out to grip his sleeve. The story ended with a man stepping down from the same marble step beside his wife. The same 4-year-old girl carried on his arm. And the housekeeper, who had taken the bullet, standing in the front row, smiling. Some of the most loyal people in our lives never make the loudest promises. They are the ones who step into the path of a bullet meant for someone who once doubted them.